Had a chance to catch up with NASA astrophysicist Amber Straughn. And wow, was it an interesting conversation. Amber has for years been working on the James Webb Space Telescope, the successor to the Hubble telescope. And she is heavily featured in a new Netflix documentary about it called Unknown: Cosmic Time Machine. James Webb Space Telescope launched in late 2021 and started sending back its first images about 7 months later. Since then, the telescope has been collecting spectacular images of deep space, better than anything humans have ever seen before. And Amber walked me through some of the most extraordinary images captured by the telescope. Amber talked about how she got her start in astronomy, growing up in rural Arkansas where the night skies were especially dark. I also asked Amber, since she spends so much time studying and examining faraway corners of the universe, whether she's seen any extraterrestrial life and how her work affects any philosophical or religious beliefs she has. Amber is also a huge fan of the band Pearl Jam, which I also am. So the conversation began there, and we took a look at an amazing experience she had recently at a Pearl Jam concert in Texas. Eddie Vedder stopped the show to give her a major shout out and then dedicated the next song to her, and even changed some of the song's lyrics to make it reference Amber. We talked all about that, took a look at the video. It was really amazing experience she had. A quick reminder, please give this video a like, a comment, or a share so I can keep bringing you interviews with interesting people like Amber. So let's get to it. Here she is, NASA astrophysicist, Dr. Amber Straughn. Dr. Amber Straughn, welcome to the podcast. We've had this planned for a little while now, and I've really been looking forward just to talking to you. So it's great to finally meet you. Welcome.
Yeah, thank you so much. It's great to meet you too. Great to be on.
Yep. And NASA astrophysicist, you're working on the James Webb Space Telescope. I'm wondering too, are you also, is it fair to call you a rocket scientist? Is that like an apt description?
I mean, I'll take it, but technically probably not. So I'm a scientist. I'm an astrophysicist, and I think most rocket scientists are probably more like the engineers, like the people that build the rockets. So I wouldn't
Actually
want to
building.
take on a title that I don't deserve.
Okay, I wasn't sure because I've never talked to a rocket scientist, never talked to an astrophysicist before. So, but I was just
Yeah.
curious. But either way, I feel like things are getting highbrow here, so that's good. But we have lots to talk about, obviously, as we went over before. But I really want to start out, and one of the things you and I have in common is just a huge affinity for Pearl Jam, band Pearl Jam. So, and I think it's safe to say, but you can confirm this, that you're a super fan of Pearl Jam. Would that be accurate?
I think that is safe to say for sure.
Great. So am I. Favorite band. So I'm, following you on Twitter. I think I actually started following you because you were a Pearl Jam fan, more so than your astronomy stuff. But then discovered all the astronomy stuff after that. But I'm just curious about how you came across Pearl Jam. Some of your favorite songs. Like what drew you to the band in the first place? I'm assuming maybe a while ago at this point.
Yeah, yeah. No, I got into them when I was probably 15, 16. I don't remember exactly, but it was somewhere in that sort of time frame. So I grew up in rural Arkansas, total middle of nowhere. My parents and most of my friends were like way into country music. So it's this whole, stereotype of people from the South liking country music, which is not a stereotype. It's widely true. And I just didn't like it. Like I did not like country music. I still to this day do not like country music. A little bit of specific types I could tolerate, but it's just not my thing. So anyway, so all my friends are into country music. And then, I was listening to other radio stations and pretty quickly around that age, yeah, 15, 16-ish, got drawn into the grunge, all the grunge stuff that was going on in the 90s.
Yeah.
So yeah, I was yeah, 15 would have been like 95 for me. So it was a few years after Pearl Jam started putting out music, but I remember hearing some of those like Vitalogy era songs on the radio, and I was like, this is my music. Pearl Jam and all the other contemporaries, Alice in Chains and Soundgarden and Nirvana. Like I loved it
Sure.
all. But Pearl Jam was definitely my favorite from the time I was, about 15.
That's interesting. So since you brought up the country, growing up in this like country music sort of atmosphere, have you ever heard the theory that I think it's Tom Morello said this from Rage Against the Machine, the Rage Against the Machine and Audioslave guitarist? He thinks that Glorified G is a country song. Have you ever heard him mention that? And what do you think of that?
I haven't heard him mention that, but that's hilarious. And thinking about the topic, then maybe, yeah, I could maybe see how it is, and the
So
music a little bit too. That's funny.
yeah, I had that same reaction. I was like, had he not said that, I never ever would have thought,
Yeah.
right? But when he said that, actually, and I think he said a little more. I think he might have mentioned like Mike McCready's has like a little bit of a twang in the guitar in the way he
Uh-huh.
plays the guitar in Glorified G.
Yeah.
And when I thought about that, I was like, wow, it does sound a little country, like it's not a country song, but
Right.
it's got some country influences, maybe. I don't know. I guess you'd
Yeah.
have to really ask Mike McCready, but um
That's funny. I'll have to go back and listen to it with that in
go
mind. But yeah, so a lot of this, I mean, not a lot, but several of those era songs, the verses songs, there's definitely a little a bluesiness,
oh yeah.
in Mike's guitar playing, which I love. That blues is different than country to me. So blues, I can get down with some blues music.
For sure, for sure. I mean, certainly the blues influences are there. Um, but yeah, the country thing, I know. I never would have thought that, but who knows?
Yeah.
So really, so it was sort of just that sound, that Seattle sound that brought you to it, or anything else that sort of like really, you know, made Pearl Jam even bigger than the other Seattle bands, because all of them were really great.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, they were all great. I loved all of it. And I don't, thinking back about when I was that young, like I can't really put my finger on why I was so drawn to Pearl Jam. And I think part of it was once I started, like the songs like Corduroy was on the radio a lot, when I
Yeah,
first sort of discovered them. And of course I'd heard all the songs from 10 on the radio because they were, so popular. But by the time I started really getting into them, there were 3 albums out. And so I was like, oh man, I just like dove in and had 3
yeah,
albums to consume. And then soon thereafter, No Code came out. And so I'm not really sure exactly what it was. Of
yeah.
course, now, in hindsight, looking back, in present day too, I so appreciate, their social activism, the meaning behind the lyrics. As an adult, I appreciate the lyrical aspect of their music a lot more. But I think at the time it was just like the hard heavy music that I
Really
that I fell in love with.
interesting. And so you've seen them quite a few times over the years. How many times?
Yeah, so I've seen them 15 times, which
Wow.
I know sounds like a lot to a normal person, but if you know Pearl Jam fans, that's not really a lot. I personally know people that have seen them over 100 times, and I know
Wow.
of people that have seen them over 200 times. So I'm for a self-professed super fan. I haven't seen them quite as much, but let me tell you, I mean, once you've seen them live, you
Yeah.
understand why people see them multiple times and multiple times on a tour. Yeah, they're just so good.
Truly, I mean, it's for me, it's the best live concert I've ever seen, and I've seen some very good
Yep.
concerts. I mean, I've seen the Rolling Stones. I saw the Rolling Stones back in
Yeah.
1994. I saw Pink Floyd in '94. I mean,
Yeah.
great bands. Sorry, like Pearl Jam, way better.
Yeah.
Especially, I think I'm not sure. Have you seen them much in the era from like the Lightning Bolt album
Yep.
and on? I mean, some of the shows they played, like I went and saw like 35 songs. They play like
Yeah.
35 songs. That's a crazy
Yes.
amount of songs.
Yeah. Yeah, their
And
shows are long. They've gotten a little shorter the last couple tours,
yeah,
but still no complaints. They're
sure.
so
Yeah.
good. And of course, the reason people see them multiple times on a tour, which I first saw them in 2003. So again, I was a little bit late to getting to their shows. Again, I'm a couple years younger than I think the average, like, super fan. But I've been seeing them a lot more in the last, 5, 10 years.
Yeah.
But every show is different and you never know what you're gonna get.
I know.
Um, and they always throw in, rarities and things that just, yeah, it's just their shows are just amazing.
So speaking of rarities, which is the most rare song that you've heard them play live.
Yeah, I should get out my Stat Tracker
That
app.
tracker, yeah,
There are a few that they've only played once. Let me actually get it out to
yeah.
see what my
Take a
most
look.
rare songs are.
I'm gonna
Yeah.
take a look at mine too.
So I've seen I was actually thinking this past weekend was the 20th anniversary of Lost Dogs.
Yes.
Which there's a few of those that, make a lot of shows like Yellow Ledbetter and everything, but
Yep.
I've seen 11 Lost Dogs, which is kind of a lot for
Wow.
only having seen 15 shows. Let's see.
And you know what's amazing
Well,
about
I'd have to take
Lost?
a look, but there are a few. One of the crazy, I've seen them at Wrigley 3 times, which those Wrigley shows are always
Yeah,
amazing.
I've been
Um,
there twice. Which shows were you at there?
yeah, so I was at, the 2016 night 2, and then both of the 2018 shows.
I was at both 2018 shows as well. Those were great.
Yeah,
Yeah,
and so they played Evil Little Goat on the second
I
show,
know. So I
which
got that on my list. Yeah,
yeah, so
yeah,
that's a pretty rare, first and only time they've ever played that,
yeah.
and I was in the pit for that show, so we were up pretty close,
Wow,
and that was fun.
wow, that's wild. So that might be the most rare song that they've played of yours. I saw them in Boston in 2016, and they played Angel. I think it was
Oh,
Boston 2016. Let me
yes,
see.
I
I think
remember
it's the only
seeing
time they played it. Yeah,
that,
Boston,
yeah,
August 7th.
mhm.
Which is a great one because I actually Evil Little Goat, I don't love that song,
Yeah, no, it's
And
silly, right?
they played it and it's like it's funny and all, but like
Uh-huh.
Angel I really like, and I had that on
Yeah,
an old bootleg, so I'd heard the
yeah,
song a lot, but they never played it. Uh,
mhm.
and then they broke it out that night, and I was like, it took me a few minutes or a few seconds or whatever to recognize it,
Yeah, yeah,
but
that's amazing.
that was awesome. What else? Any other? How about this? Any song that you still haven't seen that you really want to see?
Oh, yeah, so I have a list of those,
Oh
and
yeah.
top of that list is Long Road. I've never seen
Oh,
Long Road.
I don't know if I have either, but that is a great song. I love that song.
Yeah, and yeah, there's a couple others, a couple of Lost Dogs I haven't seen, like and again, those are super rarities anyway, but, like, Education, I love that song,
Yeah,
I've never seen
great
that,
song.
so yeah, there's a few, like, on my live wish list that I haven't seen, but Long Road definitely tops that list.
Yeah, those are both good songs. Education's one of those ones I just feel like is highly underappreciated,
Yes, for
And there's
sure.
a bunch of those I think that are on Lost Dogs as well.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah, for sure.
yeah,
There are a few songs that I've seen that are relatively rare, that I've seen multiple times, which is kind of weird for the again,
yeah,
only having seen 15 shows. I should dig into these a little bit more, but there's yeah, quite a few of them. I've seen All Those Yesterdays twice, and that's
I
only
saw
been
that
played.
one once. Yeah,
Yeah, yeah, including just this last show in Fort Worth that I was at. Looking at other rarities, that's one of them that's just like, yeah, it's only been played 23 times, and I've happened to catch it twice in my
yeah, that's
15
amazing.
shows.
I, I I love that song too, and actually was hoping to see it the first time I saw them, which I saw them for the first time way after you. I didn't see them until 2013 live.
Oh, okay. Yeah, Lightning
So
Bolt tour, like I said, yeah,
yeah,
mhm.
on the Lightning Bolt tour in Brooklyn, New York. So
Nice.
yeah, it was a great show. It was just a fantastic show.
Yeah.
Um, oh
I've seen Hard to Imagine 3 times, and
wow,
they've only played that, 41 times.
yeah,
And that song, one of my absolute favorites live. I love that song so much, and it's just so good live. Oh, it's
yeah.
great stuff.
Haven't seen that one. That's a good one though,
Yeah.
for sure. So you brought up the Fort Worth show. I wanted to talk to you about that because amazing moment at that for you. You're in the audience. Actually, should we just show it? Let's talk about it first, and then I'll show it. If you're okay,
Okay.
you okay with me showing the
Of
video
course.
of
Yeah,
this? Yeah.
yeah.
So amazing moment. You're in the crowd at Fort Worth. Eddie basically stops the show, and take it from there. You tell the story.
So, I was there with my sister, first of all. I was
Okay.
visiting Arkansas for work. I was doing a talk, and we drove down to Dallas for the show, to Fort Worth for the show. Um, and yeah, so he starts talking about, you know, a long time ago, there was this girl from Arkansas, neighboring state, so you get a lot of cheers because there's a lot of people from Arkansas at the show, who was like taken by the night sky and the stars. And I looked at my sister, and she looks at me, and we were both like, "Holy shit, what's happening right now?" And then he goes on and like tells a little bit of my life story, and says, "In the audience tonight, we have NASA astrophysicist Dr. Amber Straughn." And then he goes on to dedicate Given to Fly to me.
That is
Uh,
amazing.
I
Yeah.
mean, just like, yeah, I was the whole, and I still like, I'll be like, did that really happen? Was that a dream?
Yeah. Well, the
Here,
video is
weeks
there.
later,
Your sister got it. So you're telling me you had no idea that was going to happen.
no idea.
Wow.
Yeah,
So
no idea at all. It was wild.
wow.
Yeah,
So let's look at the video. You want to take a look at it real quick?
yeah, go for it, of course.
I'll
I've
show
watched it
it.
like 1,000 times on my phone, but happy to watch it
I know
again.
I watched it a bunch of times too because I was like, this is just such a cool moment. All right, so here it is. Let's just take a look.
I was taken by the night skies and the stars and the constellations because in B branch there's not much light pollution. So she was drawn into and absorbed into the sky, and that's where she followed her passion. And in the crowd tonight we have NASA astrophysicist. I'm getting here the first time, I'm getting chills. Ladies and gentlemen, Dr. Amber Straughn.
So that is really amazing. Now, one thing that struck me about this when I watched it and just watching it now with you is how quiet it was in there. I mean, the place is hushed. And for Pearl Jam fans, Pearl Jam fans are so enthusiastic and loud.
Yeah.
How did that make you feel?
Yeah,
You
it was just,
looked like you were moved by the moment. Like you looked emotional there.
oh yeah, absolutely. I was. I mean, this is an artist and a band that I have like literally been listening to their music, for decades. I mean, I feel like they've been a part of my life again since I was 15, for whatever 25 plus years. And yeah, just to be like acknowledged by them like in that way, by Eddie in that way was just like unbelievable. Yeah, so I was definitely emotional. Like I was shocked, I was surprised, but also just overwhelmed with gratitude, and joy. It was, it's one of those, and it sounds a bit over the top, but anyone that's a fan would understand. Like it's one of those like life highlight moments for me. I mean, it really was.
Sure.
I think when I think of like my top life moments, I think of things like my first solo in an airplane, like the first time I flew an airplane by myself, and like when JWST launched, when the telescope launched, and seeing those first images. This is that level of a thing to have that happen. It was so special, and yeah, I was crying.
Yeah.
And just trying to remind myself to like be in the moment, to stay present, and like it was awesome. I mean, and
Yeah.
it was amazing.
It was really cool, and it's fun just to watch you sort of react to it as well. And also, I mean, how clutch is your sister for getting that on video too, right?
I know. Yes,
I
she gets
mean,
videographer of the year award for sure.
that is huge.
Yeah.
I'm going to share the screen again here so we can just
Yeah.
take a couple look at then because you posted it in two tweets. So this is
Yeah.
then them kicking into Given to Fly.
This is your song.
great work by your sister there. And I mean, that was so awesome. I think, it was really cool too. The fans who were around you were like,
Yeah.
this is your song.
Yeah. Yeah.
That had to feel good too, right?
Yeah, that was awesome. And that's one of the great things about Pearl Jam fans, you make friend like I have good friends that I've met, in the GA line for shows,
Yeah.
you make friends with these folks that you're around on the tours. And another thing that, people that aren't fans wouldn't necessarily know, but of course that song is written, I guess, I mean, about a man, about a guy, right? Because
Yeah.
in the original, it's like he, him, but he changed it to she, her.
Oh, really? Interesting.
Yeah.
I,
So
I
he
didn't pick
was,
that up on that recording, but yeah, so he changed the
yeah,
lyrics for you specifically.
yeah. And then
That's
of
so
course,
cool.
instead of made it to the ocean, he said made it out to B Branch, which is my hometown, which I just like cannot
That's
believe it.
that's amazing. Say your hometown name again. Where is it?
B Branch, Arkansas. So
New
two
Branch.
words, Branch, B Branch, tiny little
Wow.
town. I mean, tiny town. When I was growing up, there was an official population sign of 63. It's probably a little bigger than that now, but it's pretty small.
Yeah. We'll talk a little bit about that in a minute, but amazing that he changed the lyrics for you too. That is incredibly cool.
I
And
know.
that he put that in there. So when that bootleg comes out, you're obviously going to be getting that, I imagine.
Oh yeah,
Um,
yeah, yeah. No, already have it, and I've already
oh, is it
listened to it
out? Is
several
it out
times.
already? Yeah.
Yeah, yeah,
That's awesome. That's
yeah.
that's so good. Well, that's cool. And you must be a 10 Club member too, right? That's their
Yep,
fan
yep.
club.
Mhm.
Yeah,
Yeah.
same here.
Yeah, I joined, back in high school, and I sort of found them and fell in love with them. And then I went to college a few years later and let my membership lapse because I was like saving every penny, kind of thing, and like totally focused on my study, trying not to lose my scholarship. So I let and I had a pretty early, and whatever, I joined 95, 96, and so sadly I let it lapse and I rejoined later, and I'm like, I let go of
Yeah,
my early member.
you'd have you'd have some amazing seniority at this point if you hadn't
Exactly.
let it lapse. Yeah. Um, and so let's talk about what Eddie was talking about there. Your captivation with the stars, I guess, from a young age, going back to B Branch,
Yeah.
growing up. I'm kind of curious. Like, we're going to talk all about what you do in a couple of minutes, but I'm curious about like where that began. How old were you when you first really noticed like the night sky, and what drew you to that, and so forth?
Yeah. One of the benefits of growing up in a small town, a small rural place, is the sky was dark. The sky was just, and still is, but especially back then, just beautifully dark. I mean, thousands of stars you can see with your eyes, in my little hometown. And I was a really young kid when I noticed the sky and was, enthralled by the night sky. I mean, I would say, 5 or 6, like very, very young.
Wow.
And as I got a little bit older, I started, asking my parents, outlandish questions about the stars and how it all worked and what was out there, and all these big questions, really, that humans have been asking forever.
Yeah.
But as a little kid, I was asking my parents this, and I think they didn't know what to do with me.
Well,
Days before the internet, yeah.
what was their response to your questions? Did they have any answer, or was it like,
Well, not really. I mean, because yeah, again, days before the internet, it's not like you could
sure,
go Google about what the sky meant or what was in the universe. But and I was the first person in my family to go to college. It's like, science was not a part of my, family history at all. But I do, my mom was always, especially both of my parents, but especially my mom was always very encouraging of my curiosity. And if she didn't have the answers, she at least told me, you can figure them out someday. Like, I specifically remember her kind of saying that at some point when I was a kid, like I don't know all the answers to these questions, but you're smart and you can figure them out someday if you want to. And she got me all the library books she could, and really encouraged my interest. So yeah.
yeah, interesting. And then, so at what age were you sort of thinking more deeply about it and considering it as like, maybe something to study in school or even, a career? Were you pretty young or was it later?
No, I was still pretty young. I mean, I knew again from the time like elementary school that I like loved science. I liked all kinds of science. I enjoyed math, which again was a little bit weird. But I loved all that stuff. I really enjoyed it. And I also was always very interested in like medical science, genetics, that kind of stuff.
Oh, wow.
From the time I was a kid. And then I was in the fifth grade when Hubble launched in
Hmm.
1990. And I remembered that, I remember like NASA's launching this space telescope, and I remember the space shuttle launches. Like, even though it wasn't like a focus in my family, like I was aware that it was happening.
Yeah.
Um, and then when the images came back from Hubble, and of course the first images that came back were not as good as they were supposed to be, right? There was all this drama because the mirror was flawed and they had to go fix it. But when the first, the corrections were made and the first, good images were released from Hubble, like I remember seeing, especially the images of like the deep fields of galaxies and thinking like, yep, this is it. This is what I want to do. I think I was probably in like seventh or eighth grade when I sort of made that like decision, like I'm going to be an astronomer. Like this is what I
Wow.
love. This is what I want to do. So seventh, eighth grade-ish, somewhere around there.
And at that point, are you sort of, looking at the night sky with a telescope, and are you studying things, or are you just kind of still gazing at, and just taking sort of note of it?
Yeah, so I didn't have a telescope. So it was, I think the night sky is what fueled my curiosity.
Yeah.
And then again, I went to a tiny little school. I had, I think, 28 kids in my graduating class.
Wow. My God.
Needless to say, we did not have any like AP astrophysics classes.
Yeah. Wow.
um, so I just we didn't have any AP classes at all, So I took you know, kids that don't like subjects blow off subjects, but like I like loved physics and chemistry, like all the science classes I took in high school, I just really enjoyed them. And then pretty early on, again, I want to say it was like sixth or seventh grade, my mom helped me get a subscription to Astronomy magazine.
Hmm.
And so I got this monthly magazine in the mail that was like what I looked forward to every month was getting my astronomy magazine. And I just like devoured those magazines.
Wow.
So yeah.
So you must have learned a lot in there too. Um,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. As much as I could, given the sort of restrictions that I had around me,
Yeah.
you know.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I'm trying to think, like, how are you seeing the Hubble images at that point? Is it just in the newspaper, on the TV news? Is that where you're seeing it?
I
This is
think it must
really,
have just been like, yeah, on TV, in the
yeah,
newspaper and on the TV. Yeah.
yeah, because the internet just wasn't my. I mean, it was
Nope.
around, but it was not what it is today.
Yeah,
Uh,
no, not at all. And we didn't have a computer in my house.
oh yeah,
And so, yep, the internet was not a part of my life until college.
interesting. So I mean, I remember back when around that time period, we had a computer and we had a dial-up internet. We had AOL on dial-up,
Yeah,
which took like 3 minutes to log on, and it was super slow. I mean, I can't
yeah,
imagine having to go back to that now.
yeah. No,
Okay,
we're so
so
spoiled.
I know we sure are. So then you go through high school, you go into college, and then you come out and you end up at NASA. And so did you, when you got to NASA, were you then working on the Hubble? Is that what happened, or tell me fill in those blanks there.
Yeah, yeah. So I went to University of Arkansas for my undergrad, majored in physics, and then I went on to grad school at Arizona State and got a PhD in physics with an emphasis in astrophysics. So I spent a total of 10 years in college,
Wow,
for
wow.
undergrad, six in grad school. And when I was in grad school, that's where you start to learn how to do research. And the professor I was working with at Arizona State, he was one of 10 what they call interdisciplinary scientists for the James Webb Space Telescope mission.
Hmm.
Back then, it was called Next Generation Space Telescope. But he was already involved in this, awesome new successor to Hubble that NASA's building. So he had a little bit, well, he had a big role in it from very early on. But in grad school, my thesis work was using mostly data from Hubble to study galaxies. So I study star formation and black hole growth and interactions in galaxies. And since most of my work was on data from Hubble, going to NASA was a good path for me. So I did, out of grad school, I did what's called a postdoc. So academics will know what that is, but that's basically sort of like what a residency is for a doctor, I think. So it's like where a young scientist that has just gotten their PhD spends a few years like really diving into research and just, using data, using theory, writing papers, writing proposals, like all that stuff that goes into being a research scientist. So I applied for, 1,000, not really, but a bunch of postdocs. And I got a postdoc fellowship at NASA Goddard Space Flight Center in Maryland, which is where I work now. So I went to NASA for my postdoc. And then after that, I got hired on as a staff scientist on the James Webb Space Telescope.
Wow. And so at that point, the James Webb Space Telescope is still, it's like a theory or like a concept, right? Or are they building it? How'd that all work?
Yeah, so I started as a postdoc at NASA in 2008. And at that point, they were, starting to build it. And a lot of the technologies that ended up in the telescope like literally had to be invented. This telescope was so cutting edge that the structure that made up the telescope itself had to be invented. And the detector technology, like there were so many aspects of this telescope that were so groundbreaking, so cutting edge, that they had already been in work for years just to enable us to build the telescope. So, by the time I got there in 2008, there were already, components of the telescope that were being built. But then is still a long road to get it completely built and launched into space.
Yeah. I mean, one thing I wanted to ask you about is just, like you said, some of the technology is so new, it was invented for the first time for this, but for a project that spans such a long time, how are they working to make sure that technology like that what the technology that they invent doesn't become obsolete over the time period that, since it takes so long to get the thing launched and into space? How is that done? Or are they confident that like the private sector is not going to come up with this, or Apple's not going to put out some little like satellite phone, whatever?
Yeah. No, it's a great question. And it absolutely happens that for these, very long, decades long missions, that sometimes the technology that's developed early on in the mission is maybe not obsolete, but definitely dated. So an example of that on our telescope, on the James Webb Space Telescope, is the detectors, the cameras that take the images. Those had to be developed quite early in the process. And by the time we launched the telescope, they were not cutting edge detectors. But look at the images. I mean, they're pretty awesome. They're definitely the best detectors in space. But this kind of just the way this works, it's not like we could just rebuild the cameras in the last year before launch. So just the way it works. Mm-hmm.
Gotcha. So then let's talk about that. It went up, it was launched in 2022 and then got up. What time of year did it launch? I think was it April around or somewhere around there?
It launched, it actually launched on Christmas Day, 2021. So the very end of 2021. Yeah. So pretty good Christmas present.
Why Christmas Day? Was that intentional for like?
Not intentional at all. Yeah. A mission this big and this complex, so the telescope, like by far, is the biggest, most complex telescope we've ever put into space. It's about 4 stories tall, and it has a sun shield that's as big as a tennis court. So this thing is huge. We had to fold it up to fit inside the rocket. It had to unfold in space, like all this drama, all these risks and single point failures. So all that to say is that we had launch dates earlier on that slipped a lot. So, the telescope, was originally supposed to launch, I don't even remember the original launch date, but 2011, 2013, 2018.
Oh, wow. So it slipped like almost a decade.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I can't remember the first
Yeah. Around
launch
that,
date,
though.
but
Yeah.
back in the early days, I think
Yeah.
everyone was thinking or hoping for those early launch dates. But anyway, all that to say is that we had a launch date of 2018 for quite a while, and then we had some fairly significant issues in building the telescope, in the testing, uh, across the board. Hard to do. Again, never been done before.
Yeah, of course. Of course.
So
Yeah.
yeah, so we had a couple more launch delays, and then once we were getting like near the end, we had a launch date in October of 2021. And so the telescope was down at the launch site undergoing these final tests. And then we had another hiccup in testing. And again, the telescope's a million miles away. It's very far away,
Yeah. Yeah.
too far away to fix if something goes wrong. So ensuring that everything was going to work was so critical for this telescope. So everything that could be done to ensure success was done. So anyway, all that to say is that we had another launch slip that was going to slip the launch into December, and then it just happened to be that Christmas Day was the day when we had a good launch window and we had good weather.
Right. So the weather's obviously very important there. So
For
then,
sure.
so tell me about, take me back to that day, Christmas morning. You wake up Christmas morning. Are you waiting to hear, like, is the weather going to hold? Like, uh,
Yep.
and then are you on site at the launch site for it?
Yeah. So I wasn't at the launch site. So we launched the telescope from French Guiana in South America.
Oh, wow.
So the telescope is, led by NASA, but it's an international partnership with the European Space Agency and the Canadian Space Agency. And the European Space Agency, ESA, one of the things they provided was the rocket, the launch vehicle.
Hmm.
And their launch port is in South America. So the telescope launched from South America. Very hard to get to French Guiana. From DC, you have to fly to
Yeah.
France and then fly to French
Oh,
Guiana.
wow. Wow.
So getting there is not easy. But another like just incredible thing about the telescope in general is that we did the last, you know, 2 years of of getting the telescope ready for launch during a global pandemic.
Yeah. How
And
about that?
and
Yeah.
so, huge fractions of the team, aside from the engineers that were actually hands-on the telescope, there were huge parts of the team, including myself, that did almost everything virtually, that
Remote.
did
Wow.
everything from home.
Yeah. Well,
Um,
I mean, most of the world was functioning that way,
exactly.
for
Yeah.
that over that period. But so I guess I'm wondering though, are you guys all on Zoom then? Are you on a Zoom call,
Yeah.
like watching? I mean, you must have had video of the thing launching, right? Like a
Oh
live.
yeah, sure.
Yeah.
So yeah, we had launch rehearsals in the years leading up to launch where we, the computer simulators like gave us a fake launch on the computer where we were, working the launch. And again, we'd done all those from our home offices,
Yeah.
and so the Mission Operations Control Center is up in Baltimore, about an hour north of where I live in Maryland. And my original plan was to be up at the ops center, for the launch up in Baltimore. I was going to be up there for launch, but as the launch slipped closer and closer to the holidays, my husband and I just made the decision, like, we're going to go to Arkansas. I've worked launch rehearsals from my laptop. I can do it at home. And so I ended up, yeah, working the launch and watching the launch from my mom's couch in
Oh,
Bee
wow.
Branch, Arkansas,
Wow.
with the
That's
Christmas tree over in the corner. And yeah,
Yeah. Well, that's kind of interesting too, like you kind of came full circle in a way. You're back, where it all started for this
absolutely.
momentous occasion. So tell me, in that moment though, when you're watching it, are you nervous? And is everyone else nervous? Like, this is a huge deal, right?
It's a huge deal. Yeah. And so many of us, I mean, I've worked on the mission for
Yeah.
15 years,
Yeah. Years of
and
your life. Yeah.
yeah, and so many of us had poured, years or if not decades into the mission. And again, I already mentioned, like, it was so complex. The engineering behind this was so complex, and if something goes wrong, there's no way to fix it. Like, the stakes were high.
Yeah. Yeah.
um, and we people used to always ask me before launch, like, "Oh my God, are you scared?" And our engineers, so amazing. You know, we all trusted that the engineers had really done everything they could to make sure the telescope was going to work once it got to space. But you watch that video of how the telescope has to unfold. We had 344 single point failures on the telescope that if any one of them goes wrong, the mission is done. Like all of those things combined, like, yeah, a lot of nervousness on launch day.
Yeah, I mean, I would imagine that's the case. And then once it's up and it's like made it out of the atmosphere, let's say, and into space, right? Then is there relief at that point?
No. So there's a little moment of celebration, like at least it's off the Earth. But then we had these 2.5 weeks where we had to unfold the telescope in space.
Yeah.
And those 2.5 weeks were like extreme stress. Because that's when so many of those single point failures could have gone wrong. Like if the sun shield doesn't unfold, mission's over. You know, if the secondary mirror doesn't unfold like it's supposed to, we're done. You know, $10 billion out, gone in space.
And when you say done, is there a way to bring it back, fix it, then send it back? No, it's just over. It's done. Done.
Yeah.
So
wow, high stakes for sure.
Yeah. That's a lot. Well, so it got up there and it did great. Now, are you saying it's unfolding? Is it still traveling while it's unfolding, or does it get up into space, unfold, and then go to its destination, if you will?
Yeah. So it is traveling the whole time.
Wow.
And so, yeah. And again, the telescope is its final home is 1 million miles from Earth.
Yeah.
So that's about 4 times further away than the moon.
Yeah.
So it got, a big boost, from the launch. And I think it crossed the moon or passed the moon super quickly, like maybe 12 hours. I can't remember.
Wow.
But very quickly. But the deployment started almost immediately after launch. I mean, just, within the first half hour. I mean, within the first minutes, we got the first deployment, the solar array deployed. And you can see that on some of the videos. You can see the solar array deploy, which is really cool. But yeah, it unfolded on its trip out to L2, which is this place in space where it resides.
Wow. So 1 million miles away. How much farther away is that than the Hubble?
Yeah, so Hubble actually orbits the Earth in what we call low Earth orbit. So Hubble's not actually that far away. It's about 350 miles up.
Oh, wow.
So
that's nothing. Yeah.
Yeah, so it's relatively close. It orbits the Earth once every about 90 minutes. But it's still above the atmosphere, which is the critical thing, right?
Yeah.
To get those clear images is you have to be above the atmosphere. Now Hubble observes the universe in optical light, or like visible light, like your eyes see. The JWST is an infrared telescope. So it sees the universe in light that is a little bit more red than what your eyes see. And you can sort of think of this like heat radiation, like you go outside on a sunny day and you feel the warmth on your skin, like that's infrared radiation. And everything glows in infrared. Like if you've ever seen an infrared camera, like a night vision camera, everything glows. And so we had to put this telescope out in deep space, 1 million miles away, so that it could get very, very, very cold, so that the telescope itself wasn't warm and glowing in infrared light, so it wouldn't like see itself glowing, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that makes sense. Interesting. And then, so when it gets out there 1 million miles away, it's just sitting there in a fixed spot.
So the telescope actually orbits the sun in line with the Earth. So this region of space where it is, it's called L2, the second Lagrange point. Is the nerd name for it. But it's basically this part of space that is like a gravitationally stable place of like the Earth and the sun. So it's kind of a place where the Earth-Sun gravity system sort of balances out. So we can put spacecraft in that part of space, and then they will orbit the sun in line with the Earth. So in essence, we always have like a direct straight line to the telescope. Like you can kind of think of it, if you go outside at night at midnight and point straight up, like the telescope is kind of in that direction.
Gotcha. That's interesting. That's actually one thing I wanted to ask you about. And this is a little bit off the James Webb Space Telescope. topic, but since you just said that, it made me think of it. And that is the orientation of outer space and
Mhm.
how the Earth fits into that. So, like for instance, one thing that I just can't seem to wrap my head around, and I don't know if this is a problem for other people, is like if I were standing on the North Pole, for instance, and I looked up into the sky, am I seeing the same stars that somebody at the exact same time standing on the South Pole looking up into the night sky would say? No.
Not at all. Right. So yeah, I mean, it kind of helps if you can, like, in your brain, sort of zoom out and picture, you have the sun and the earth orbits the sun, of course. And where you're standing on the earth, if you're on the North Pole looking up this way, you're seeing these stars, right? And if you're on the South
Yeah.
Pole down here looking this way at night, you're seeing these stars. So
Yeah.
it is completely different. Yeah.
The universe just exists in all directions, right? It's going out in every direction. And that's what I think when we see some of the pictures, that's
Yeah.
what it's hard. I don't know. For me, it's hard to wrap my head around some of this stuff because it seems like you're looking at a big part of the universe actually in some single images. So let's take a look. Should we take a look at
Yeah,
some of them?
let's go for it.
All right. So the first one is the very first. I think this is the very first image. This is the deepest infrared image of the universe yet. This is, I think, the first one, July 12th, 2022. So here we're looking at, and I don't know if you can even answer this, but how much, like what area of outer space are we looking at here? Is this like, can it be put into miles, or are those too small of measurements to describe how much space we're looking at?
Yeah, definitely miles are too small. So, I mean, the first thing is just like setting the context for the image. Like, what is it that we're seeing? So, in this image, basically almost every single point of light is a galaxy. Okay. And so, to take you and your listeners back to like eighth grade science class, right?
Yeah.
A galaxy is just a collection of stars held
Yeah.
together by gravity, right?
Yep.
So, and our sun is a normal star. So
Yeah,
if
like in the Milky Way. Milky Way's
yep,
galaxy, yeah?
yep, yep,
Yeah,
Milky Way is our home galaxy. So if you go outside at night and
got it.
look up at the stars, every star you see in the sky is part of our Milky Way galaxy, which again, just a
Right.
bunch of stars held together by gravity. So our Milky Way galaxy has a couple 100 billion stars, just to put a number to it. Okay.
Okay.
And now, of course, we've known for years and years, many years, that there are other galaxies outside the Milky Way, just like the Milky Way, some bigger, some smaller, but other collections, groupings of stars, other galaxies. And in fact, we think that there are hundreds of billions of other galaxies, each filled with hundreds of billions of stars. So back to the image, almost every point of light that you see in that image is a galaxy.
That's a full
Filled with
galaxy.
a full galaxy with hundreds of billions of stars. There are a few stars scattered across the image, and you could see them. They have these bright spikes around them, and those stars are, within our Milky Way. They're nearby, but like ignore the stars. The important thing's the galaxies. So we're sort of
Okay.
looking through that little smattering of stars in our Milky Way to the galaxies that are very far away.
Got it. Got it. So those stars are kind of in the foreground, essentially, of
Exactly,
everything we're
exactly
looking at
right.
here. Wow,
Yeah,
that's so wild. Because when I was looking at this, and I know I read about it and whatnot, but it just looks to me like it's just a bunch of stars. But no,
mhm.
that is just so it's essentially an incomprehensible amount of space that we're looking at, right?
It's an incomprehensible amount of space. And the other like thing that blows my mind about all these deep images, again, there's thousands of galaxies in this one image. So you might think, okay, that's the whole sky, right? But no. So the
Right.
size of this image on the sky would be about the size of a grain of sand held at arm's length.
Yeah. See, that's why I
So
can't wrap my mind around this stuff, you know?
yeah,
So
yeah,
that's just a tiny, it's like a pen dot of the total sky. All right.
right, right.
Yeah, that's wild. Okay, so let's go to the next one. This is Jupiter, right? Do you see that?
Jupiter.
And this is a
Yeah.
new one. This is relatively new. And this is like an infrared image of Jupiter, if I'm not mistaken. Is that correct?
Yep, correct. Yeah. So we're sort of used to thinking of Jupiter or seeing it in red, right? Jupiter
Yeah.
kind of is reddish orangish, and we've known since we were kids or learned about the Great Red Spot. So the Great Red Spot appears white in this image, along with some of the bands on the planet. And what we're seeing there are like the high altitude clouds, the very high clouds on Jupiter, and those just show up as white in infrared light. And then another cool thing about this image, you can see sort of the orange glow at the bottom and the
Yeah.
top, and those are the
Yep.
aurora. Other planets in our solar system have aurora, northern lights, southern lights, just like the Earth does.
Interesting. And then also, I think it sounds like too, this was getting some of the weather, if I remember correctly. Tell us about the weather on Jupiter here.
Yeah, so by studying the different sort of patterns that we see in those bands across Jupiter, we can learn about some of the weather patterns. And of course, the red spot or the white spot in this image is really just a giant storm that's been raging on Jupiter for centuries. I don't know. Planetary
Yeah.
scientists probably know how long it's been going on, but a really long time.
Yeah.
But yeah, this new detailed data shows us new details about weather patterns on Jupiter.
Interesting. And what would the weather be like there? I mean, is it really nasty? Would a human be able to survive the weather on Jupiter?
Oh yeah, no. All the
No?
all the outer planets are very, very nasty places. Wouldn't want to be there.
Is it just the wind? Is the wind too high there? Or I mean,
The
look,
wind and the composition. Jupiter is also, it's like a big puffy, what we call a gas giant planet. So it's
right.
not like a rocky planet like the Earth and Mars and Mercury. Like the inner solar system has these rocky planets that are just rocks
Yeah, that you
with
could
a
stand
little bit
on.
of an atmosphere. Yeah.
Okay.
So the outer planets are not like that. They're mostly
Yeah.
mostly big balls of gas.
All right, let's take a look at the next one. This is the Crab Nebula. Okay, so this is where things, for me at least, get again. I can't wrap my head around this stuff. But this is a new one. Why don't you tell me about what the James Webb Space Telescope caught here?
Yeah, so this is, and again, sort of scale, this is within our own Milky Way galaxy, so relatively close to home. Let's see, it says 6,500 light years away,
Yeah,
so far away,
yeah,
but still relatively close.
yeah,
So this is basically the remnants of an exploded star. So a star exploded in a supernova back a long time, hundreds of years ago. In fact, I think the supernova was observed on Earth in like 1049 or something like that. Like
yeah,
there are
yeah,
ancient records of the supernova, which just appeared like as a dot, a new star in the sky, essentially. And
yeah.
that was recorded, I believe, by Chinese astronomers. Maybe I can't remember for sure. But back to the image. So this is the result of what happened to that star after it exploded in a supernova. So when stars explode, they expel their contents into the surrounding space. And what you're seeing here is those contents moving through space and running into other stuff in space and sort of creating all these shocks, which are showing up as the structure that you see in the image here.
Yeah. Now, is that damaging to other things that are nearby it in space or relatively nearby it? Like would that, if there were a planet, like if Earth were there, would that just destroy everything on Earth if it were?
100%. Yep. Supernovae
Yeah.
are not good for life at all.
Yeah.
Yeah,
But
not only because of like you know, the fact that they spew their contents into space, but just the massive amounts of radiation, that
hmm,
happen in these events. Yeah, supernova are not good for life. Like, I'm sure somebody's done the calculation. I don't know it off the top of my head, but if a supernova went off, relatively close to us, it would be game over for life on Earth.
now I want to ask you a little something about that later. But this image we're looking at here is 6,500 light years away. So that
Mhm.
means that it took 6,500 years for this to travel to Earth or to the space to the James Webb Space Telescope, correct?
Right,
So
right, right,
we're
right.
basically seeing what it looked like 6,500 years ago. It could look very different now in
Yep.
actuality. Like if we could go get a live feed of it right there.
Yeah. And that's another one of these sort of, trippy, mind-blowing things about
Yeah,
space and about these images is that, yeah, we are literally seeing it as it was 6,500 years ago. And
yeah,
objects like this, like supernova remnants, do change very fast. On the scales of human lifetimes. Like there are other supernova remnants that we can see them, like, we take an image now, we take one in 3 or 4 years, and we can see how it's expanded and changed. And so there's no doubt that today looks completely different.
so 6,500 years ago, just to give, and this is like, because I think about that, like 6,500 years ago, what does that even mean, right? Like that's 4,000 years before the pyramids were built, about
Yeah.
4,000 years before the pyramids were built.
Yeah.
So you're seeing that that's what that looked like then. That's
Mm-hmm.
wild. All right, so it's going to get even crazier on that front as we move along here.
Yes.
This is the Phantom Galaxy, which is M74.
Yes.
Go ahead and tell us about what this is. This is a wild image. This actually looks like it'd be a great album cover, by the way. Maybe,
Yeah,
maybe,
right?
maybe, maybe you could suggest it to Pearl Jam. I know they're working on an album.
Yeah, well, we already have binaural, right? Which that came
Yeah,
out when I was in college, just sort of starting on my journey to becoming an astronomer. And then they released this album with Hubble images on the cover, like
that's right. Yeah. Oh, so
so
that's really interesting too. Yeah.
yeah,
Uh,
yeah. So yeah, that was a great moment for me as a young budding astronomer.
yeah,
But
and a Pearl
yes,
Jam
this
fan.
image of
Yeah.
the Phantom Galaxy is incredible.
Yeah.
So this is a galaxy. I can't remember off the top of my head how far away it is. You probably have it in your notes there. But it's a galaxy somewhat similar to the Milky Way. You can kind of think of it like our home galaxy. And we're seeing it sort of face on, so like right down the barrel. And in the
Mhm.
center, you can see that sort of blue area. So that's a very young star cluster. So lots of young stars are down at the center of the galaxy. Galaxies like this, almost all of them essentially have gigantic black holes at the centers. And so these kind of images are revealing details about the black holes at the centers. You can see there are these sort of cavernous sort of voids in the image,
Yeah.
and those are regions where new stars, baby stars, have these massive stellar winds and radiation that sort of blow out these big bubbles that we're seeing in images like this.
Yeah, so I do have it here. It's 32 million light years from Earth, which is that is just so the last one we looked at was 6,500 light years. This is 32 million. So that's almost 30 million years before the first humans emerged on planet Earth. So basically we're seeing this is like we're seeing, I mean, I think it's almost like a time machine, isn't it? Like
Sure.
you're like traveling back in space, like in time, space and time, right? To see what it
Yep.
was like. And now is this remotely the same, do you think, today, or is it very different
Well, galaxies on
looking?
the whole typically, yeah, it wouldn't be as dramatically different as something like, the Crab Nebula. And again, you're looking at a huge region of space here, right? The galaxy
Yeah,
is huge. The Crab
yeah,
Nebula, again, relatively speaking, is much smaller. And so its structure change, you can see the structure change a lot more. But yeah, I mean, yes, over the course of 30 million years, you could notice differences in the structure of galaxies for sure.
what do you think about the comparison to the Milky Way? Is this a much bigger galaxy than the Milky Way, or like similar in size?
I can't remember what the mass of it is, but generally I think it's pretty similar.
Yeah,
And definitely structurally it's similar because you can see the spiral arms. You can kind of see the echoes of where the spiral arms are in the galaxy, which is similar to the Milky Way. We know the Milky Way has spiral arms in it, so it's structurally similar to the Milky Way.
interesting, interesting. All right, so next one. So, and I think that is, so it gets even crazier here with this next one. There we have the
Yeah.
Cartwheel Galaxy. This one is 500 million light years away. So
Hmm.
just that is around the time that oxygen developed on Earth and the ozone layer formed, and the first plant sprouted on land. I mean, that's all right.
Yeah.
Tell us. I mean, that's how far away this is. It's just amazing something can be that far away.
Well, you're right, right, yeah. And this is I love this one. This one's beautiful. So the Cartwheel Galaxy is a beautiful example of a galaxy collision. So we've talked about the Phantom Galaxy and our Milky Way galaxy. These are galaxies that are sort of just hanging out by themselves, all alone in space. But sometimes galaxies get close enough that they interact or even merge together. And so for the cartwheel, we think maybe a couple 100 million years ago, another galaxy, a smaller galaxy, sort of smashed through the center of this galaxy and caused the structure that you're seeing here, almost like ripples in a pond, which is causing this sort of spoke structures that you're seeing in the galaxy.
And this also, like, I guess like the other ones, is just an extremely enormous amount of space that we're looking at here too. I mean, I feel like it looks like there's a couple of other galaxies maybe in the background.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. So those other galaxies that are in the field of view there. Yeah. So it's again, yeah, huge part of space that we're looking at here.
Yeah, that's wild. Okay. Next one, moving along here. This is the Pandora cluster.
Yes.
So tell us about this. This almost looks similar to that very first one we looked at, but I feel like it's different too. What are we seeing here?
Yeah, so this is similar to the first image that we released and that we talked about, in that this is an image of a galaxy cluster, and actually there are several clusters in this image. So similar to the other one, essentially every point of light that you see here is an individual galaxy, and galaxies often group together in what we call galaxy clusters, which are sort of like cities of galaxies, lots of galaxies relatively in a small space. Again, everything's relative. And these are here, I think there's 3 separate galaxy clusters that are themselves about to merge. And so you can see that, and you can sort of even see the members of the clusters. They appear a little bit like whitish. So across the different image, there's sort of these 3 different groupings of these more whitish looking galaxies that are members of the cluster. And then the rest of the galaxies scattered across the image are further away, mostly. And yeah, so that's what's going on in this image. This image is actually 4 different images from the telescope sort of stitched together. So that's why we're seeing a little bit of a wider field of view here.
Wow, amazing. Okay, and then 2 more that we're going to look at, and this one I think is actually on your Twitter profile. This is the Carina Nebula. That is on your Twitter profile, right? Your like your background image.
Yeah. Of all the images that we've released, this was one of the first 5 that we released back in July of last summer, July of 2022. And of all the images that we've released, this is probably my favorite, just because it's just so stunningly beautiful. It's wonderful. So
it really is.
Yeah. So what's going on here? This is the Carina Nebula. We called it the Cosmic Cliffs of Carina. And so this is a stellar nursery. This is a place in space where stars are being born. And so the sort of dusty orange structure across the bottom of the image, it looks like dust, right? And it's because it is. It's space dust. And then up above all of that structure, actually sort of out of the field of view, you can't quite see them, but there are several very hot young stars that have massive amounts of stellar wind and radiation that is sort of, forcing down on this region of gas and dust that we're seeing, and helping to cause stars to be born, and also maybe stopping star formation. So there's a lot of interplay there that we actually don't quite understand yet. But this image again is a stellar nursery, again, relatively close to home within our own Milky Way galaxy. But compared to the galaxy clusters, a small part of sky that we're looking at here. I think it's still a few thousand light years across.
Wow. So, and all that dust. I mean, if you were to say, like, if you were to get on a spaceship and fly through that, would you notice the dust when you get there? Or would it be like, is it really dense? Or is it sort of like
No. So it wouldn't be like, what you think of if you drove through a dust storm here on Earth or anything like that. It appears dense, again, sort of because of the scale.
Got it.
But again, in these images, so every point of light in this image is a star, like similar to our sun, So it's always important to sort of pull back and think about scale when you're talking about these images.
Yeah, I know. Crazy. All right, last one I want to look at here, and this is I think this is sort of like a classic image, but it's like a new view of a classic image, right? This is the pillars of creation, but this is not what we've seen from like the Hubble, right? This is like a different just a, maybe it's the infrared nature of it. Is that what it is that's different?
Yeah. Yeah, that's exactly what it is. So yeah, Pillars of Creation. The original that was taken by Hubble back in the 90s, in the mid 90s, I believe, is this like iconic, beautiful image. And similar situation to Carina, this is a region of where newborn stars are being born. It's sort of a stellar nursery. But as you noted, it looks different than what we're used to seeing with Hubble. And you're totally right. It's because we're seeing it in infrared light. This particular version of the image is actually mid-infrared light. So it's even redder than a lot of the infrared light that we've seen before. And so with infrared light, we're able to see sort of the dust that's in the image. Again, it looks dusty. That's because we are seeing the space dust here in this part of the nebula.
So amazing photos, and I guess we're going to continue to see a lot more of these, in the days and months and years to come from the James Webb Space Telescope. Is that right?
Absolutely, yeah. We got such an amazing efficient launch that we have probably over 20 years of fuel. Now, something else will probably go wrong on the telescope before 20 years is up. But we have tons of fuel, and we will definitely keep using the telescope as long as we can.
Wow.
Like, we're hoping for at least 10 good years of observations and hopefully more.
So one thing I want to ask you, and I hope it's okay to talk about this or ask about it. I know I guess it's less taboo these days. Is all of this space, like we were looking at these huge regions of space, enormous amount of space. What about extraterrestrial intelligent life, aliens? Like it's been in the news so much lately and whatnot, and obviously the military is talking a lot about it now. But is there any chance there's any of that in some of those images that we saw, like given just how much of space we're looking at?
Yeah, so I mean, there's a couple of different like ways to talk about extraterrestrial life, whatever. But I guess the first thing to say is that I personally don't think that any extra or any intelligent life has visited the Earth. Like, I don't think that there's evidence for that.
Yeah.
That being said, there's definitely, things in the sky that we can't explain. NASA had a UAP panel set up, and they issued a report earlier this year about how we can, study those things. Like you said, the military has done some of this work too.
Yeah.
But yeah, I don't think there's, any evidence that any of those occurrences are, truly intelligent life forms from elsewhere.
Yeah.
That being said, just my personal opinion and my personal feeling is that given how big the universe is, right? We've talked about that some, hundreds of billions of other galaxies with trillions of stars and like literally countless planets. Like planets are everywhere. And that's actually something that's a relatively new discovery. So when I was a kid, we only knew about the 8 planets in our solar system, right?
Yep.
Now we know that planets are everywhere. And that's thanks to some of NASA's dedicated planet hunting telescopes like Kepler and TESS. So we now think that statistically, there are more planets in the Milky Way galaxy than there are stars. So probably literally trillions of planets just in our Milky Way. So just given the numbers, with all the caveats that it is extremely hard to have the conditions that are conducive to life developing. There's no question. It's really, really hard for life to start to develop. But given the vastness of space, like I personally think that there is evolved conscious life elsewhere in the universe.
Just based on like statistically, like the law of averages would suggest, maybe, I don't know, I'm not a scientist, but right, based on that, that's kind of what you're saying, that it's out there, that there's something out there somewhere, right?
I tend to feel like there is, and different scientists, and there are
Yeah.
scientists that study this and that study exoplanets specifically. That's not my field, and there are scientists that
Yeah.
are there, and it's the whole range, right? There are scientists that are like, absolutely, without a doubt, there's got to be life out there, and there are very good scientists that think that given everything that has to happen for life to develop, that there's probably not. Um, it just seems, given the abundance of life on our planet, it just seems so unlikely to me that this is the only place in the entire cosmos that
Yeah.
life is developed. Like, I can't. Maybe it's the
Yeah.
optimist in me, but I think there's got to be
Well,
life out
I'll
there.
tell you, I feel the same way that there just has to be something else out there, and probably maybe a lot of other
Yeah.
things out there, right? Just
Yep.
given how much space is out there. But I'm sort of like you. I almost want to believe that aliens have been here and whatnot, but I just don't think that there's any evidence, right? Like I feel like, especially like NASA, you guys are always looking at space. Like you would think that we would have seen a flying saucer whiz by at one point or another, right? Like, and you haven't seen that, right? Is that what you're saying?
Yep, yep. We have not seen that, or if we have, I'm not high up enough in NASA to know about it. But
Yeah,
no,
but
no,
you're actually
there's
looking at the stuff, right? You're actually
yeah,
looking at these things. Like you'd be like, well, what's this? If there was one there, right?
yeah, yeah, for sure. Yeah,
Yeah.
I don't think there's evidence for anything
Yeah.
having visited the Earth. But yeah, I do think there's probably evolved conscious life elsewhere in the universe, and I think microbial life is probably abundant in the universe, and I think
Yeah.
it's probably exists in our solar system. Like, I think the outer planets, some of the moons in the outer planets, we know they have liquid water oceans. We know
Yeah.
that they have the molecules in those oceans that form the basis of some of life on Earth. Like, we've seen that, we've observed it. And so I think within the next 20 years, we will discover life, microbial life, within our solar system, given some of the missions that NASA is already working on to send out to the outer solar system, like the Europa Clipper, for example.
Yeah. Interesting. And what is that? Can you explain what that is?
Yeah. So again, this is completely not my field, but it's
Yeah.
basically a mission that we're sending to the moon Europa, which is one of these moons that we know has an icy crust. But we know
Yeah.
that there's liquid water underneath it because we've seen geysers shooting out, and we've been able to do spectroscopy on the geysers and figure out, like, yes, that's liquid water. Yes, there are molecules in there that on Earth, again, sort of form the basis of microbial life.
Yeah. That's wild. And Europa is a Jupiter moon or Saturn? I
Yes.
can't remember.
Yep. Jupiter.
Jupiter. Yeah. Yeah.
Mhm.
Very cool. So here's another thing I'm wondering. With all this, you've spent, years of your life and a tremendous amount of time, like looking into deep space, studying it. I wonder about any like religious views you may have, and how that either how you sort of like reconcile any religious or philosophical views on human existence based on what you observe in the universe, since you have such an intimate view of things up there.
Yeah. Well, that's a big question. We could spend another hour talking about that. Well, you've heard about my background. So I grew up
Yeah.
in rural Arkansas, in the Bible Belt, in a very sort of fundamentalist Christian denomination. So that was definitely a huge part of my childhood. But I've been a skeptic. That's part of being a scientist, is like asking these hard, difficult questions from the time I was
Yeah.
a kid. So again, sort of obnoxious to my parents at times, I believe. Um, so that's my background. I think, of course, I've changed my views a lot from the time I was a kid. It's hard for me to say where I am right now. I'm not in that space anymore. Whether or not there
Yeah.
is like a higher power or a God, I don't know. I think part of my background and my upbringing makes me think that there is something else, there is something out there. Um, but again, I'm an evidence-based scientist, and I don't know that we have the evidence for that. I definitely don't think we would ever be able to prove that, because by definition, it's supernatural, right? And
Yeah.
so, I remember when I was in high school and even some in college, like I had some friends that were very into like what's the like apologetics or whatever the field is. It's like trying to prove that God exists. And like
Yeah.
I even, I was interested in that for a little bit, like in junior high and high school. And I just like I completely gave that up. Like if there is something more, it's all mystery, right? We're never going to be able to prove it. And if we could, then that would take away the value, I believe. So all of this to
Yeah.
say is that, I would probably consider myself an agnostic. But I do still find like, I definitely find value in the moral and ethical sort of traditions that we find in some of the world religions, including Christianity. I mean, the teachings of Jesus, if we could actually carry them out, a
Yeah.
lot of it, the world would be a better place. But
It's
they're real hard, man, right?
yeah. And but he's got great ideas, there's no
Exactly.
I mean,
Exactly.
yeah, it's just not easy, right? But I
I
guess here's oh, go ahead, and then I'll ask.
Yeah, no, I mean, I was gonna say, going back to like my studies and like thinking about space, I think what in thinking about these images, what do they tell us about ourselves and about the world at large? And I think one of the things that they tell us, for me at least, is that looking at these images of like the Crab Nebula is a good example. Like all of that stuff that's out in space from an exploded star will eventually form other stars and planets and potentially life. Like our human
Yeah,
bodies were once part of a star,
yeah,
right? This is
yeah,
this is the Carl Sagan
yeah.
ism, that we're stardust.
Yeah, you said that in your TED Talk, which is actually a great thing. People should take a look at that if they haven't. You gave a really good, it was maybe about a 17-minute TED Talk, I want to say.
Yeah.
And you talked about that. We are stardust, right?
Yeah,
uh,
yeah. I literally, like, it sounds like a poetic, but it's like literal truth
yeah,
that the iron in your blood and the calcium in your bones was literally forged inside of a star. It was once inside a star. And I think that shows our visceral, real connection to the cosmos, which is huge and important, but also to us, to each other. Like
yeah,
we're all made of that same
yeah,
stuff, that we all have common origins. And the just having a bigger view on those sorts of things kind of helps to put perspective into things.
yeah. Now that's a very interesting and it, like you said, like sort of a poetic way to look at things. But I want to ask you this too, and because this is something that I struggle with, even looking at the images that we looked at here today. Sometimes I think, wow, is it possible that none of this is real, and that it's some sort of simulation? And when you're talking about God, that's actually just some computer or some other
Yeah.
higher power that figured out technology and figured out how to make this all seem very real. Has that ever crossed your mind? Does that cross your mind? If it does, do you try to like keep those away because maybe that is a distraction?
Yeah, so I've definitely thought about it a little bit, and that's something that comes up in these types of discussions. So it's definitely, yeah, an interesting topic of conversation, and it is absolutely plausible. Like it's not even hard to think that it might be possible and maybe
Yeah,
even likely.
yeah,
But that being said, yeah, I don't spend a lot of time thinking about it because I don't think it matters.
yeah,
At the end of the day, and again, this goes back to sort of the larger view and this idea that we're all, connected. At the end of the day, we are human beings here on this earth that are hopefully doing our best to contribute something good to the world and to interact with compassion and kindness to the people around us. That's what matters. The study of space matters. All of this stuff matters. Music matters. All of this stuff means a lot to us. But at the end of the day, I think, the biggest thing we can do as human beings is try to live with kindness and compassion and love to the people around us and to try to contribute something good to the world.
that's well said. Um, I want to ask you too. You brought up the supernova thing and how that wouldn't be good for life earlier. Is there anything about space that worries you? Like maybe it's other intelligent life that's out there, or just stuff, like like a rogue asteroid that might come and destroy Earth, or black holes or a supernova happening. Are you worried about that? Like, let's say in your lifetime, like, are you worried about like from an existential perspective?
So I'm not worried necessarily about any of the things you listed, like that are in space. And as far as potential intelligent life that exists, even though I think, again, personally, I think it's likely, I think that even if it does turn out to be true that it exists, that we probably won't ever make contact with it for that same reason, that space is just too big.
Really?
So that is kind of
Hmm.
an existential like loneliness there too. So there's an
Yeah.
aspect of that. Um, so the other things though, no, not really worried about any of those things. Of course, there could be a rogue asteroid. That'd be a very bad day for Earth. But again, statistically, very unlikely. The things I worry more about are the things that we know are actively right now happening. Climate change being the key, one of the key things that I do believe is an existential threat to us. Um, and of course, the ongoing human conflict that we have,
Yeah.
um, on the earth between different countries, and again, even within our country, it seems. I mean, I've only been on the earth 40, a little over 4 decades, but it seems pretty bad out there right now.
Yeah, in our life, I'm around the same age, and yeah, I can't. It's hard to remember a time when it's been worse, actually. Right?
Yeah.
Mhm.
So
Yeah.
I definitely worry more about those kind of
Earthly
threats.
worries than otherworldly
For sure.
worries. Yeah.
Mhm.
So talking even about like climate change and whatnot, um, that's a good segue into the next thing I wanted to ask you about, and that is becoming interplanetary. Like, if let's just say we can't figure some of these problems out, and I know like Elon Musk talks about that. He thinks it's like necessary for us to become, yeah, interplanetary, and making it to Mars. I mean, what do you think about all that? Do you think it's really realistic? Maybe in I mean, I suppose it's realistic that it could
Mhm.
happen at some point, but what about in our lifetime? Do you see it happening?
Yeah, so I definitely think that there will be humans on Mars in our lifetime, and, I certainly hope. I mean, NASA's plan, of course, excuse me, with the Artemis mission is to take humans back to the moon like in 2 years, right? It's really
Yeah.
soon that humans are going
Yeah.
back to the moon. And then of course the moon is a stepping stone to Mars. And so NASA and private space companies are developing right now the technologies that will eventually take people to Mars. And so I do think like it all depends on budgets, right? It all depends on how well these projects are funded. But I think, yeah, I'm hoping by like the 2040s that we'll see
Wow.
people on Mars.
So
I
that's
think
like
it'll
15
happen.
years.
Yeah, I think it'll happen in our lifetime. That might be a bit optimistic. Again, it all depends. It really does all depend on budget. Like we have the brain power and the technology development to do it if we had the funding.
Yeah. And that's obviously necessary. I mean, and let me ask you this too, though, and this is like sort of away from the budget stuff, but would you go to Mars? Would you be interested in being one of the people that, I don't know, let's not say test it, but let's say a few people have gone and it's like, well, now they're taking, they're taking reservations. Are
Mhm.
you, Amber Straughn, reserving a seat on the Mars Express?
So my instinct is to say yes, absolutely. Strap me to the rocket tomorrow. So my instinct is to say yes. I do think I would say yes.
Yeah.
However, it is a long trip, right?
Yeah.
And I feel like the older I get, I like to think I'm not old yet, but every year that goes by, I do think more about my family here on Earth. Like, that in 6 years' time, some of them might not be here anymore. Like, let's hope that's not the case. And
Yeah.
like my doggies, like I've talked to my husband about this actually, which is kind of bonkers. But like, if I went to Mars, like my oldest dog would definitely not be here when I get back. I'm like, I love my
Yeah.
dog.
Yeah.
But I think I would. I do think I would. Speaking of
Interesting.
which, I don't
Is
know if
that
you hear
him?
him, he's barking right now.
And what kind of dog is he?
Great Danes. We have two
Oh,
Great Danes
wow.
right
Those
now.
are big
Yep.
dogs. Yeah.
Big dogs. Yep. They're lots of love.
So you'd want to go. You'd very much want to go, but don't know if you actually would. Yeah, I don't know that I would want to go. I don't even know if I would want to go to the moon or even out to outer space at all, because it's
Hmm.
like,
Oh, I would go to the space station in a heartbeat. Like
would you?
literally put me
Yeah,
on the rocket tomorrow. I'd go to the space station for sure.
yeah.
And I'd go to the moon. Yeah. The only reservation about Mars is it is a long trip.
It's a long
But
way.
I
Yeah,
think I would still do it actually. Yeah.
yeah. I mean, even these things like that Jeff Bezos is doing, like with the Blue Origin, and like I think
Oh yeah.
even like Michael Strahan and a couple other like celebrities got on there and they shot up into space for like I don't know, like a hot second, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
I
I
don't know if
totally
I
do
would
that.
do that. You would
Oh
totally
yeah.
do that, yeah,
Oh yeah, I'm
yeah,
up for any of that stuff.
yeah.
I mean, when I was an undergrad, I this is not the same thing, but I did an experiment on NASA's zero gravity plane. So I've actually experienced weightlessness, which
Oh wow,
is amazing. Like such a you can't describe it, So all that stuff is a lot of fun to me.
yeah, that's fascinating. Well, you brought up the moon mission, the Artemis mission, and I think that's great that at least we're gonna get some people back on the moon relatively soon. And I think it's awesome too that they've got those Prada spacesuits, the new spacesuits that they unveiled earlier this year, which look totally cool. And I was wondering, I guess, from your standpoint, just as a NASA employee, do you get like some replica spacesuit or some sort of like spacesuit swag from that? Because that looks, that's some pretty good
Yeah.
spacesuit attire that
Yeah,
they.
yeah, those are really cool, right?
Yeah,
That was really fun when they announced that. So yeah, the spacesuits are and the technology that goes into like
yeah.
building spacesuits is really interesting too. But sadly, no, I don't have a spacesuit. I wish I did.
But I mean, even just like a replica, you know how you get like a replica football jersey
Yeah,
or whatever? Like they don't give out replica things like that. That's Prada, but like,
sadly, no.
um,
Their government employee perks are not the best.
yeah. All right. I thought maybe,
Aside from the work.
I mean, they're kind of going to be like a bit of a fashion statement. I don't know if you
Yeah,
saw that New York Times like chief fashion critic Vanessa Friedman wrote like a huge thing about them and about like how they symbolize like the forward nature of science and like big thinking for people. It's interesting.
yeah,
So
yep. I love it. Yeah, I think it's yeah, it is. It is and always like bringing other people into these endeavors is always a good thing. And of course there's also that there have been no women that have stepped foot on Mars or on the
on the
moon.
moon, but that's going to change. Yeah,
Gonna change. Yeah.
yeah,
This next the Artemis 3 mission, well that'll be yeah, that's the first landing.
right.
So yeah, it's super exciting. Yeah, sign me up. I would go to the moon.
Yeah. Well, I'd love, if you want to go, I'd love to see you go, that'd be great. Well, this has been a great conversation, Amber. It's really fun talking to you, and I appreciate everything you've talked about. One thing I want to do is you're really big on Twitter, and you've got there's a lot of things out there. Like I mentioned the TED Talk. I'll put a link to that in here because I think it's really good. Anything else that you want to mention about where people can follow you or any other projects that you want to mention?
Yeah, yeah, Twitter, and I'm on Instagram too. And the only other thing I guess I would mention, if your listeners haven't seen it yet, there's a new Netflix documentary about the telescope.
Oh,
So if they're
oh,
interested, if any of you are interested in learning more about the telescope and sort of the journey to launch and releasing the first images, the Netflix documentary is great. It's called Unknown Cosmic Time Machine, and I'm in it. I'm one of like the three
oh,
main people that they interviewed. So,
oh,
but
that's so awesome. Yeah,
aside from that, they did a great job with the documentary. It's very good.
that's great. And is that out now?
Yep. It's on
We're
Netflix
talking
now.
in mid-November. It's on Netflix now. That's great. I'm going to watch that.
Yeah,
Um, this is great. Well, awesome speaking to you and meeting you, Amber. Thanks so much for taking the time. And we should do
yeah,
it again sometime.
yeah, for sure. Yeah, we'll talk more Pearl Jam and more space. Two of my favorite
Absolutely. Maybe
topics.
I'll run into you at a concert or something.
Yeah, for sure. Well, there are rumors
I
of a
know.
big tour for next year and almost a guaranteed album. So I can't wait. Oh, before I go, I
Yeah.
also have to show you my tambourine from Eddie Vedder.
Oh yeah. Oh my God. Yeah. I almost
So I took it down off my wall so I could show it to you. So I put it here
nice.
close. And I got
Absolutely.
it framed. So it's in a giant frame, but it is incredible. Let's see. Can you believe it? I'm so happy.
Wait, can you put that back up? Because I want to get it to the Zoom switches and it didn't
Yeah,
switch.
yeah. Okay,
Yeah,
let's
I just want a good look.
see. Get it here on the camera.
That's so awesome. That is really cool, Amber. Yeah. I think you posted that on Twitter too. Did you post that? You posted a photo of that on Twitter. I
I
meant to bring it
did.
up here today.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's so awesome. So you caught
And
that? He threw that in and did you cut or no, they gave it to you.
well, so yeah, and this is another just like wild part about the night. Before the show, I got a message from the general manager of Tin Club, who had been sort of talking with over the past year because I guess I did a guest DJ segment on Pearl Jam Radio last
Oh, you
year.
did. Ah, that's so
Um, yeah, actually today, so November 15th was the day it aired last year.
ah,
So through that whole experience, I got to know Tim a little bit. It's not like we're
Tim
like
Bierman, right?
BFFs,
Yeah.
but yeah. And so yeah, he texted me before the show and he was like, "Hey, hang around after the show. Ed has a gift for you." And I'm like,
What?
what's
Yeah.
happening?
Yeah.
And so of course for that Fort Worth show, Eddie had the flu, right? He was getting over the flu,
Is that right?
and Matt had COVID. So Josh Klinghoffer was drumming that night. So it was a wild show. But so I didn't get to like interact super closely with any of the band, I think because Eddie, well, part of the reason is because Eddie was sick. So someone else gave me the tambourine, but oh my gosh, so awesome.
Yeah. That is so great. What a memory and what a great piece of memorabilia to have.
For sure.
That's really, yeah, really cool. And it's so cool that you did the. Can people find that, or can I want to put a link to it so people can hear your guest DJ appearance? Is that out there
Oh yeah.
somewhere?
Yeah, it's on the SiriusXM radio app. I think
Yeah,
they aired it several times last fall, and I think you
yeah.
can still go in and find it on the app.
All right, we got it. We got to find it, or even maybe just send me the playlist that you put together for
Okay,
that, so I can put it
will
up here
do.
just so people can see the songs you picked. I know people are interested in like what songs, because I mean, how many songs do you pick for that? It's a pretty limited amount, right?
I think it was like 8, maybe.
Yeah.
Yeah,
How
and I
long did it
sort
take
of
you to? How long did it take you to decide which 8 songs? It would take me like a week.
forever.
Yeah,
Yeah, because how do you pick out 8 songs?
yeah,
So I sort of weaved in my story of, how I became interested in them and like some of the first songs that I fell in love with, and also some of the time space has made it into their music.
yeah.
So
Super
that's how I
cool.
approached it. Yeah, so much fun.
Well, send that to me if you can, just like your list, so I
Yep,
can put it up. Just I can put it on the screen and people could see it.
yep, will
But
do.
yeah, this was awesome talking to you. Thanks. Let's do it again sometime. All right,
All right,
Amber.
yep.
Take
Bye-bye.
care.
Thanks.